Shoes. I don't know what it feels like to walk in your shoes. I don't know what it feels like to take on the risks that you take on a daily basis. I don't know what it feels like to have to kiss the people that you love every day and know it might be the last time you see them. I don't know what it feels like to have to make a split-second decision, knowing that your vocation or your humanity might be judged for the rest of your life. I don't know what it feels like to walk in your shoes. I only know what it feels like to walk in these shoes. So here today, I'm here to talk to you about these shoes and these shoes alone. And my hope is that somehow we can find a way to get your shoes and my shoes on a journey and a road that we both want to belong to. This is the story that I've started out countless sessions of training law enforcement across this state with. This deep idea that we don't know what it feels like to walk in one another's shoes, and yet it's probably one of the most important things that we need to do. Training law enforcement was something that was incredibly difficult for me, particularly with my own story. I remember when I first began to train law enforcement, I walked into an elevator at the police administration building, going in the elevator up to the chief's office, and 4 officers in their blues got into the elevator with me, and I immediately became nervous. Now, some might argue I was in the safest place in the city, but I immediately became nervous because for me, the only gun I've ever stared down is that of a police officer when I was 18 years old and putting myself through college. Got off of work that night, decided I would take my security uniform off and change into my Orlando Magic Shaquille O'Neal jersey. So that's when Shaq was skinny. And decided I was going to start on my way home. As I got a few blocks away from my job, I saw an unmarked car coming behind me. Another car sped up on the side of me. Officers jumped out with their guns drawn and said, "Put your hands up, put your effing hands up." And my hands went up in the air, and immediately in that moment, I was afraid for my life that I was going to be killed. I was afraid because I was the only one out there. I knew they could tell any story they wanted to tell, and no one would believe me because I, like Mike Brown, was an 18-year-old, 270-pound kid. Why did I think that? Because that story sat inside a larger story that my dad told us growing up when Dr. King came to his school. He was 13 years old. He took my dad and a few other kids, and he took them into the bathroom and showed them the main water pipe, one running, the same pipe running to the white fountain and the colored fountain. Showed them it was the same exact water. The only difference was that which man created on the front. And my dad recognized in that moment that they were drinking the same thing as their white counterparts, and they have this mind-opening experience. They go in and they're trained by Dr. King to participate in student protests in Greensboro, North Carolina. And when they subsequently do, they're arrested, detained by law enforcement, pushed into a holding cell where the door is pulled shut, where these children were urinating and defecating on themselves with the white police officer standing outside laughing at them. So on the day that my dad had this very powerful reality, it was marred by this very traumatizing reality. And that story became even more true when my brother, who was a Bible college student, was assisting his pastor, who was in the middle of kidney failure. And as he was on his way back to Bible college, he was pulled over by a police department who mistakenly pulled him over and did not check his driver's license. Instead, pulled him out of the car and began to assault him and pulled on his genitalia and his personal parts. And when he moved to defend himself, he was thrown to the ground. The officers jumped on top of him. A gun was put to the back of his head, and he was told to not move or they would blow his effing head off. He filed charges against the department. He subsequently lost. And when he came out, the officers were standing there, and they smiled at him. What did my brother remember? The same smile that my dad talked about 40 years ago, back in the Jim Crow South. Now, I know while it's very easy to say, well, those 3 stories actually don't have specific details connected to one another. But the reality of that story and that narrative that's lived inside our family has informed who we could trust and who we could not trust. Particularly when you think about my great uncle, my dad's uncle, who was hit over the head by the Ku Klux Klan and left on a railroad track and was killed. These are my shoes. And yet, amidst that, I still made a choice to show up and find a way to contend for peace. Now, the challenging thing is, in my local department, after I trained police officers, we had a sex scandal break out. And I was at another point of decision. Do I not speak out about the injustice in our local department because I am positioned closely in this bridge building context, or do I speak the truth to power? And so I publicly began to critique our local department. And after the events with Alton Sterling and Philando Castile in Baton Rouge in Minnesota, I felt called by God to call for an action and a protest in Oakland. I thought 300 people would show up. It was closer to 3,000. And in the spirit of Jesus cleansing the temple, I felt called to lead over 1,000 people onto the freeway, shutting it down for 4 hours to bring awareness around the injustice locally and the challenge nationally. And after that, I received death threats. I was abandoned by many of my white evangelical colleagues, yet I was supported by some. The law enforcement circles rejected me and barred me from any participation, even though the practice that I had been doing with them had become the best practice around trust building in the nation. And I had to ask myself, was it all worth it? But I believe it is, because we are offered a false choice in our society. You are either with them or you are with us. But I actually think the deeper choice is that we must be for justice and freedom, which is a part of the world God is making. And every group needs to leave where they are and make a journey to that place. And so I lift up this idea of shared awkwardness. There are things that we don't want to do, that we have to do, and the only way we're going to do them is to do them together. So while I was barred from the law enforcement spaces, just 2 weeks ago, I was called back by the law enforcement spaces, saying even amidst the protests and your critique, we recognize we still need your voice inside, and we're going to have to find ways to make the change. So just yesterday, I trained here in Sacramento 70 law enforcement executives and officials, still finding ways to lean. Lean into the challenge. And that will never stop my critique from going away. I went to jail in Ferguson in 2014. I'm sure I'll go to jail again to contend for the truth. Not because I want to, but because I have to. Thank you.